Today I'm going to talk to you for a minute about an incredible and controversial man, Martin Luther King Jr. This is a big old fat book I have. It's called A Testament of Hope. It's a collection of his writing and speeches, and I've not read very many of them. I've read some of his sermons and other writings, but I went right to kind of what's supposed to be one of the best ones. And it's a letter from Birmingham Jail. Now, the background on this letter is that Birmingham was kind of the hotbed of racist contention at this time. This was the year, what year was this published? 1963. So, if you know very much about his life, and I do an author bio on him, be very worth going through, and I'll do that another time. But he had been kind of pulled into this movement because of his position in society and the education that he had. He was very young. He was, I'm not even sure he was 30 yet, but most of this, yeah, he must have been in his 30s by this point. And died at like 38 or something very young like that. And so Birmingham was about to have another election, and things were really stirring because a lot of people felt like that the new governor was going to, or mayor was going to be even more racist, and so this was a big problem. And so he has his Southern, what were they called? Southern something was the name of his organization. I can't remember right now. And they were forming these, they were forming groups to do passive resistance, which actually, and I mentioned this in the Tolstoy post, goes back to Tolstoy and some of his writings, which I didn't know until recently. There was obviously a connection to Gandhi, and then back to Tolstoy in the 20th century. How do you bring about cultural change in nonviolent ways? So I think he calls it nonviolent resistance, is I think what Martin Luther King Jr. called it. And in all his teaching and writings, it goes back to this central theme, even in his sermons, goes back to this central theme of how do we love each other, how do we get along, how do we be equal when we're different, how do we form the society that should be. You know, we went up on the steps, and I Have a Dream, and that's his most famous, and I'll link it here, you can watch that, that speech that he gave in Washington. But anyway, so he goes to Birmingham, and he's part of this resistance group, and I think in Birmingham they did a, let's see, they were doing demonstrations. I have this other book from a guy that was close to King that I'll post on in the future, and that's the story in his book is what keeps coming to my mind when they did a march, and I don't think this was the case. This might have been a sit-in, I'm not sure. But they were arrested, and they were put in jail because they were disobeying the law, because they were going into like white establishments and things like that that they weren't supposed to do. But they weren't being violent, and often they were acted upon violently, and they would not be provoked, they would not respond back violently, and that was a real point of integrity for King, and that was a huge instrument that he used to create pride in those that followed him, and a real sense of personal integrity and spiritual nobility, because they were willing to let people attack them, and they didn't attack in return, and it was a very noble act. So he had a lot of emotional and spiritual loyalty among his followers to him, because as he preached this principle, and then they adhered to it, they felt better about themselves, and they felt empowered in new ways that they'd never felt before. Now, of course, there's the whole King Malcolm X struggle going on in these years, and that's fascinating as well. I can link a couple things, and I could do another author bio on Malcolm X for you another time. But the whole civil rights movement is very worth studying. It is a fascinating period of time. Another really fabulous reading to do along with this one is one by Ayn Rand in her Virtue of Selfishness. She's got a fabulous racist article in there. And I haven't blogged on that one either, but I will in the future. So anyway, so he's in jail, and there's some white pastors. I'll read you this little intro. 8 prominent liberal Alabama clergymen, all white, published an open letter earlier in January that called on King to allow the battle for integration to continue in the local and federal courts, and warned that King's nonviolent resistance would have the effect of inciting civil disturbances. Dr. King wanted Christian ministers to see that the meaning of Christian discipleship was at the heart of the African American struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. And he was a pastor. That was his primary job. I mean, that's what he was doing professionally when he was pulled into all of this. And he felt like these pastors were his brethren. They were all Christian. They had the same beliefs. They spoke from pulpits. They talked about Christ in his teachings. And so he draws on Christian doctrine a lot in this letter and explains it in new and fascinating ways. But he goes back to the, the theme that I, really kind of rules for me, and that is the theme of natural law, and what is law, and what's the difference between legal versus lawful, and how do we know when we should obey the laws of society. Those are all central themes in this work as well. He talks about his disappointment in the white leadership. He thought that there would be many that would see the Christian principles that he was trying to live and promote and the peaceful way in which he was trying to advance his cause of equality. And he really felt there were no, really good white people that came forward and that were part of this movement, but by and large, the white middle class was pretty apathetic, pretty well, this is the time, this is the, just why can't you wait? Why can't you? Because they don't want it to be their generation that had to address this issue. And he talks about those arguments. He brings up several typical arguments that continue to come up. And one of them is time. Just wait, And he has this beautiful quote in here. Let me see if I can find it real quick. He says, "We must use time creatively and forever realize that the time is always ripe to do right." Oh, love that. The time is, in fact, I had read this and fallen in love with it, and my sister found a plaque with that written on it, and she bought it before I did, and I was so mad because I knew the source and I knew who had said it and I knew the context of when it was said and what it was referring to, and it's beautiful. But there's many wonderful quotes in here that you would want to memorize. He says, "There is a more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest, and I'm grateful to God that through the Negro Church the dimension of nonviolence entered our struggle. If this philosophy had not emerged, I am convinced that by now many streets of the South would be flowing with floods of blood." He really felt like he was on God's errand. He knew he was on God's errand, and he knew that it was his call to bring about actions that would create more fairness and equality in the nation. And I mean, I don't think I've been to a major American city that does not have a street named after him. He is that major of a figure, and you really ought to read some of his writings. They're really fantastic, and it's awesome because, of course, I didn't understand the depth of his education either. He's read everybody. His liberal arts foundation is absolutely phenomenal. He quotes all the greats, and he quotes the greats again here in this letter, and so he can speak to the average man, and he can speak to the intellectual, he can speak to the Christian, he can speak to government leaders, and he did have all those connections, and many respected him while others, kind of violently resisted him. He's such a, but now I think as time goes on, he's one of those figures that future generations have more and more and more respect for, and of course, Malcolm X did some good things of his own right in an opposite direction, which is really kind of fascinating. But anyway, I've had many really fabulous discussions on this reading. I'll never forget one in particular. We did the thing that I recommend in the video trainings. One of the things that you do when you mark your book is that you decide on one theme that book is going to mean to you, that you're going to take from it forevermore. And when you remember that writing, you're going to remember that one thing it meant to you. And we were going around in a circle talking about our one theme that we chose from this reading, and one of the girls said that hers was silence. And silence is touched on a couple different times in this writing, and boy, we had a fantastic discussion on when you should speak up and when you should be silent, and what are the characteristics, what are the principles of the use of silence, and when can we use it effectively. And it was fantastic. There's just all kinds of themes. Love is a major theme of Martin Luther King. He talked about love all the time and felt like his was at bottom, at its, at its core, it was an act of love. It was his way of loving the world. and trying to bring more love into the world. He's a controversial figure. There are many people who believe that he had affairs on his wife and was kind of hypocritical in his religious beliefs. That's a discussion for another day when I do an author bio on him. But in the meantime, Letter from Birmingham Jail is short. I'm sure you can find it online. If not, just go grab a quick copy from somewhere. There's a lot of different, it's printed a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. And it's, you know, and here, this is a taller book, but I mean, we're talking 10, 15 pages. And you will be so enriched, and your book club should totally read it. You read it with your youth, have them read it. It's beautiful. It's modern language. It's not difficult to read, but it's profound. It's so deep. It's one of those readings that I say, read something short, and then just suck the essence out of it and have a tremendously fabulous experience and let it change you. And he is definitely a character that can build character in your life. The end is beautiful. He says, I hope that this letter finds you strong in the faith. He's talking to these Christian pastors, and he really wants them to see him as their brother in the gospel, as their brother in Christianity. And it's an open letter. It was published in the paper, so it wasn't just sent to them privately. They published openly. He published openly. He wanted everybody to see his rebuttal. He starts out by saying, I don't usually do this because I'm super, super busy, but I'm sitting here in jail, so I may as well answer you back. And it also speaks to his brilliance. He may have had access to some of his books, but so much of this is just quoting and thoughts off the cuff that are just ideas that are in his head because of his incredible education and because of his commitment to God and his understanding of true principles. And it's just super awesome. So he says, I also hope the circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all of their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King Jr. Beautiful, and his writings are very moving that way. I mean, they almost bring you to tears sometimes. I just have a tremendous amount of respect and love for him after reading some of his writings, and it means so much more to me, the things that he did. I've had that experience so many times with individuals in history that are just names or events, and then you read what they actually said, and it implants something in you, and it builds your soul somehow. I don't know. Anyway, he's marvelous. Please read it. You will have an incredible experience, I can promise you that. If this was helpful, please pass it on. Please like us on Facebook. Please let everybody know about our blog and our crusade to build character through the classics. See you next time.